It's the AFC Wildcard Preview here on Oneberg. Good evening and welcome to the TroopCast. I am your host, Ed Troop, alongside Dawn Rebel from the TribLive High School Sports Network, joining me in to this AFC Wildcard Preview, in which the Steelers, the number 6 seed at 10-7, will visit the Baltimore Ravens, who are the 3rd seed in the AFC and 12-5 this Saturday at 8 o'clock. It is the 3rd matchup between these two teams in which they split the regular season matchups. But the Steelers are reeling, Dawn. They've lost 4 straight going into the playoffs. Not a lot to feel good about this, including a 9.5-point spread. The Ravens favored at home against the Steelers. Pretty incredible, but I guess when you take a look at the last 3 or 4 weeks, it's probably warranted at this point.
Yeah, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I knew the line was going to be around a touchdown. First time I'm hearing that it was that high. But you're right. Again, the line is trying to draw even money on both sides, and there's not a whole lot of confidence nationwide, yet alone here in Pittsburgh with this team. The way the season has finished, I think there's a little too much panic for my liking. I think yes, they're going to be significant underdogs, and yes, they are a long shot to finally break that nasty streak that everyone loves to bring up of failures in the postseason. But they have a chance. Some people are talking like they have no chance at all, which is kind of amusing to me.
Don, when you take a look at this series between the Steelers and Ravens, it's, of course, one of the most decorated in the NFL, one of the biggest rivalries over time. Tomlin versus Harbaugh. You can go back through history when these two teams have met, whether it's regular season or playoffs. It's always a close game, regardless of what record each team has or what they've done up to that point in the season. This season, no different for the most part. The first time these two teams met at Acrisure Stadium back on November 17th, the Steelers won that game 18-16 to improve at 8-2 at the time. The Ravens dropped to 7-4 at the time. And the Steelers once again held Lamar Jackson in check like they have most of his career. 207 yards, a touchdown, and interception. Derrick Henry only 65 yards rushing in that game and a touchdown. The Ravens, 329 total yards. That was a season low for them. They had 3 turnovers and 12 penalties. The Steelers took advantage of all that. Wilson, 205 yards passing. Najee Harris, 63 yards rushing, and Pickens had 89 yards receiving. The Steelers only 1 turnover, Dawn, in that game. That's key. And they won time of possession, 36 minutes in their favor during that matchup. The Steelers took care of the Ravens the first time, but that was at Acrisure Stadium. This game's on the road in Baltimore.
Yeah, and you know, you were talking about all the close games. The rematch in Baltimore a few weeks ago ended up a 2-touchdown victory for the Ravens, but that game was close. You know, the Steeler mistakes, the Russell Wilson fumble inside the 10-yard line was a massive play, and then of course the subsequent drive by Baltimore going 95 yards. That was big in that particular game. The one thing that they have not, you know, they've obviously, the numbers against Lamar Jackson have been kind of impressive. I don't know that he's had a lot of bad games against the Steelers. He just hasn't had that one big blow-up game. Even in the victory a few weeks ago, it was Derrick Henry that really was the catalyst to that 2-touchdown win for Baltimore. And even in some of the losses for Jackson against the Steelers, I don't think he's played bad. He's been, I can remember a couple of games where, you know, he got zero help from his receivers, a lot of drops, a lot of penalties. That's a team thing. I think the burden has been on his shoulders. Why don't you do well against the Steelers? I don't think he's done bad against the Steelers, but he hasn't had that explosive game. The Steelers have done a great job keeping him in check as far as that's concerned. But this is a pretty good team, Ravens team, as we found out. You can keep Lamar in check, but if you can't stop Derrick Henry, then you're in for a long evening.
And they could not do that in that rematch game you mentioned on December 21st last month. Derrick Henry goes for 167 yards. That was actually his first 100-yard game against the Steelers, and it was big, 167 yards. Also, they got a big game out of Zay Flowers, their talented wide receiver. He had 100 yards in that game. He's going to be questionable for this game this Saturday, leaning towards not playing from everything that we've read and heard so far this week. And Lamar Jackson, 3 touchdowns, only an interception, and 207 yards passing in that 34-17 victory. But, Dawn, this game was tied up 17-17 with 2 minutes left in the third quarter before things started to unravel for the Steelers. The Ravens took a 1-touchdown lead, 24-17 in that game. And then Mika Fitzpatrick comes up with a huge interception. The Steelers have momentum back in their favor in the fourth quarter during that game. But then came the pick 6 by Russell Wilson. That put the Ravens up by 2 touchdowns. And they ultimately go on to win that game and ultimately go on to win the division. 418 total yards for the Ravens on that day. Only 1 turnover. Meanwhile, the Steelers, 32 minutes time of possession and 2 turnovers. They flip-flopped. The game at Acrisure, the Steelers dominated all the team stats, but in that loss in Baltimore, the Ravens did.
Yeah, and it was a banged-up Steeler team, not to make excuses. They were missing key personnel on both sides of the ball, which made, I thought, their effort coming off a very physical game against Philadelphia, in which they got beat up pretty good. I thought it was actually – you don't want to lose, but it was a pretty good effort, a pretty good showing by the Steelers. This streak of 4 consecutive losses against 4 pretty darn good teams, I think the first 2, the losses on the road to Philly and Baltimore, again, banged up in both games, didn't bother me as much as the losses to Kansas City, in which they really were pretty much a no-show, and Cincinnati. I know they knew that they had no chance to win the division before kickoff against the Bengals because, the Ravens plowed the Clowns to win the North Division. And maybe in the fans' eyes, in our eyes, because we were talking, we were hoping for a victory against Cincinnati and a trip to Houston, thinking that would be more desirable than a trip to Baltimore. Not that I'm saying that the Steelers cashed in their chips before kickoff and were fine with going to Baltimore, because that is going to be a mighty, mighty tall test. But there were just a lot of curious things, curious decisions made in the game plan against the Bengals that really leaned on the conservative side of things against a defense that you have no business being conservative against. You want to just go full throttle like we did when we played at Cincinnati. So that was concerning too. The health of this Steeler team is great, but the health of the Steeler team was good going into the Cincinnati game. And again, those last 2 losses were bothersome because you had no excuses.
Yeah, they were healthy those last 2 on Christmas Day. And, of course, this past week against a Bengals team in which after they give up that opening drive to Burrow, where he went right down the field, the offense marched right down on our defense. The defense regrouped, and they had a great game. They shut down Joe Burrow and that Bengals team, and they're going to have that same effort this Saturday if they want a chance against the Ravens.
Yeah, the big thing, and again, like we just talked about with Derrick Henry going off, they need to curtail that Baltimore run game. If Henry has his way again and mixes in a couple of big runs with his consistent 4, 5, 6 yards a rush, it's going to be another long afternoon, which we have seen from this defense up until the Bengals game. I thought it was a really good bounce back by that group. But I think the Ravens are going to be without Zay Flowers. I know you mentioned he's questionable and they're going to try to do whatever. That's a big, big difference for them on the offensive side of the ball. Yes, they do have other weapons, but he is such a key. If you don't have to worry about him, then you can put more emphasis on covering those 2 tight ends they have that can cause chaos against you. Not that the other receivers can't, but it's a significant drop off after Flowers as far as their wide receivers. But they have two excellent tight ends. I think that will make life a little easier for the secondary in coverage. And I think the Ravens, if they don't have Flowers, are going to lean more on the run game since they had so much success a few weeks ago. So that's the key. The key is for the Steelers defense is to really contain and shut down that Baltimore rush offense.
You are watching the AFC Wildcard Preview Show here on Oneberg. Glad you could join us on our Oneberg Facebook channel, Oneberg YouTube, or maybe you're listening back on our Spotify. I am Ed Troop. That is my good friend Don Rebel of the TribLive High School Sports Network, joining us to preview the Steelers and Ravens this Saturday at 8 o'clock, AFC Wildcard. Don, here's a date for you, January 15th, 2017. After the 2016 season, that was the last Steeler playoff victory. It was an 18-16 win at Kansas City. They went on the following week to lose at New England in the AFC Championship game. That was the last time the Steelers appeared in an AFC Championship game. Since then, it has not been pretty. 4 additional losses. Last year, the 31-17 loss at Buffalo in an AFC wildcard game. Another AFC wildcard loss in 2021 to the Kansas City Chiefs on the road, 42-21. 2020, that was the year they go 11-0 during the COVID year with limited fans. And then they lose late in the season multiple times, kind of, again, similar situation to this year, reeling into the playoffs. That was the loss against the Browns at home, 48-37. 2017 was the divisional loss against the Jacksonville Jaguars. That was a very good Steeler team that got upset by the Jaguars, 45-42. And as I said, that last loss in the AFC Championship game, 36-17 at New England. So when you add that all together, the last 5 playoff games, the Steelers 0-5, offense averaging 27 points per game. Not too bad, but again, playing catch up in a lot of those games. But defensively, here's the stat I want to talk to you about. In those 5 games, they've given up 202 points, averaging 40 points per game during that stretch. Not only have they lost these 5 playoff games, they've gotten beaten up pretty good during this stretch.
I think this defense, especially the middle of the field, and now that it appears that everybody's healthy, Jackson, I think, is coming back at cornerback. They have some depth. I think this is the best defensive team the Steelers have had in a while. That period that you're talking about in the mid-teens to late teens to the early 20s, it went from an aging defense to where the last few years, everybody's sort of banging them because they have the highest paid defense in the NFL. They have been banged up and hit by injuries by the end of the season a couple times. Again, no excuses now. They're healthy on that side of the ball. Yes, things can happen in game, but at least to start the game, I think this is their best defense in that time frame that you're talking about.
I agree.
Yep. I also think, to be honest with you, the thing that gets lost in all this, a lot of people love piling on Tomlin when it comes to these playoff losses. They were not, outside of the loss to Jacksonville, in which Jacksonville just came up and punched us in the mouth. We were not the better team in any of those. New England was the better team in the championship game, plus we were missing key parts. It pains me. It absolutely pains me, Edward, to say that Cleveland was the better team when we lost to them in 2020. But I think that's, to be honest, the truth.
Yeah.
And I mean, Kansas City and Buffalo the last couple of years have just been at another level higher than us. And the fact that we were able to keep those games interesting for a little bit was kind of amazing. Instead of, banging on Tomlin about, the playoff failures. We haven't won since this. We haven't won since that. 4 in a row, 5 in a row, 6 in a row. What's going on here? Maybe we step back and look and give him credit for getting some of those teams into the postseason that probably, in all honesty, they had no business being in the playoffs.
Yeah, you had an aging Ben Roethlisberger there towards the end of
Right.
the teens into the 2020 season, 2021. And then last year, of course, that was the Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph ride up to Buffalo. And you're right, Kansas City, Buffalo, the last 4 or 5 years, two of the best teams, and still two of the best teams in the AFC. But the facts are facts. They've not won a playoff game since the 2016 season. January 15th, 2017. They will try to change that around this upcoming weekend in Baltimore. Dawn, this will be the 5th time that the Ravens and Steelers have played in the playoffs. And the Steelers all time in the playoffs, 3-1 against the Ravens. They won in the in 2001, the 2001 season, 27-10 at Acrisure Stadium. That, of course, was the season they went on to lose to New England and Tom Brady the following week in the AFC title game. And 2008, they beat the Ravens. That was their Super Bowl run, in which they won 23-14. And 2010, they defeated the Ravens 31-24. The last time the two teams met in the playoffs was a wild card game in 2014. The Steelers go to Baltimore. They lose that game 30-17. But in those 4 games, they've been pretty close football games. Other than the 17-point first playoff win at home, in which they won 27-10. 9 points in 2008 was the difference between the two teams, 7 in 2010, and 11 the last time they met. 13 points the last time that they met. So these have been close matchups for the most part when it comes to Steelers-Ravens in the playoffs, and that's pretty much what I think we could expect again this upcoming Saturday. Not saying I think we'll get our picks at the end of the show. Not saying I'm thinking the Steelers are going to win this game, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than this point spread of 9.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that, definitely. I saw a stat that we're talking about the past, that the Steelers' record against divisional foes in the playoffs is like 10-2. I think their only other loss beside the one you just mentioned against Baltimore was the Cleveland loss in 2020. Now, that goes back to the 70s when we were playing Houston in the postseason, the 2000s when we had those wild card games with Cincinnati. So the franchise has done very well in third meetings against rivals from their division. Again, that really doesn't mean anything come 8:00 on Saturday once they kick it off. But it's familiarity and having success against those teams. Which we split this year, going 3-3 in the division. But then you go back to a year ago, and we did very well. I think it was 5-1 in the division. Yep. So, there's something to be said for that. There's a quiet confidence. I mean, as confident as Baltimore is coming in, and they should be. They're playing good football at the right time, and they just beat the Steelers in their backyard a few weeks ago. The Steelers have every right to be as confident going in, knowing the success they've had against the Ravens, including earlier this year with a victory. So, all that is nice talk for us in the media and for fans to discuss. But again, come 8:00, a lot, that all that goes by the board.
You're watching the AFC Wildcard Preview Show here on Oneberg, here on our Oneberg Facebook channel, Oneberg YouTube, or maybe you're listening back on Spotify. I am Ed Troop. That is Don Rebel of the TribLive High School Sports Network. We're previewing this Saturday night's AFC Wildcard game between the number 6 seeded Pittsburgh Steelers, who are 10-7, and the Baltimore Ravens, the 3rd seed, the AFC North champs, at 12-5. Don, the Steelers are really going into the playoffs, and a lot of it has to do with the quarterback play of Russell Wilson. They have not gotten the play out of Russ that they got during most of the season when he was in there. One point that I brought up on the Steeler postgame show this past week was I was shocked during during the Cincinnati game that they did not go to Justin Fields, especially in short yardage situation. He's your guy. He's your speedster. They put him in there in some packages the last few weeks leading up to this game before he got hurt a couple weeks ago as well. And Fields was nowhere to be found. Do you feel I'm going to ask you 2 questions. One, do you feel that they should go to Fields at different parts of these short yardage situations this weekend in Baltimore? And 2, do you think they will get Justin Fields into this game plan this weekend?
I think they'll get him involved. I don't think they're going to get him involved heavily, and I don't know that that's a good idea to get a second quarterback involved heavily. One of the things that I'm sure that they're concerned about is Russell Wilson's play, and pulling him out here and there, I don't think is going to help solve anything. I know that he's been banged up and really hasn't even been the backup until I think last week in the loss to the Bengals. Again, maybe that conservative mindset of the coaching staff. Could they have brought him in on 3rd and short and 4th and short when they turned it over right before halftime? That it is hilarious to me that everybody is harping on the decision to not to go for it on 4th and really even less than a yard in that situation. I had zero problem when they decided, all the confusion as to far as, they had thought the 3rd down run was a first down. Then there's a lot of confusion going on, but I had no problem with them going for it on 4th down. Obviously it doesn't work out. So, okay, the coach is a clown.
I thought it was a good decision too. And they picked up the first down both times on the field, and both times replay assist, brought it back.
And there are times when Mike Tomlin will say something in a post-game press conference where you think to yourself, all right, well, he's feeding us a line there. But I thought his explanation made sense. I mean, our punting game has not been strong recently. You get off a short punt or a bad punt or a punt that's returned, they still have 3 timeouts. Who's to say they don't come down and score 6 instead of settling for 3? So
right.
I didn't have any problem with it. Again, if as he said on the broadcast, if you can't get a yard on 2 plays, you really don't deserve to win, and that's what happened. I just to get to your question, I would not be surprised if we don't see Fields, but I don't know that it will be specifically in short yardage situations. That's kind of telling. If you are going to use him in short yardage situations, I would use him more as a decoy. Hand it off to Warren or Harris or whatever, and have them think that Fields is just going to keep it and take it, because that's what most teams should do is play it that way.
Dawn, if the Steelers are to beat the Ravens and upset them in this wild card game this Saturday, they're going to have to capitalize on some what I like to call keys to win, right? And here I've picked out 3. I want to get your thought on each one of them. We'll go through one by one, and then we'll finish the show up with our picks for this wild card weekend in the NFC and AFC. So keys to win, Dawn, I think number 1 is win the time of possession. Keep Jackson and Henry off the field in this game if the Steelers are to upset the Ravens. When you look at the time of possession, the first time the 2 teams met, the Steelers had 36 minutes on the field. The second time they got together, about 30 minutes of time of possession. So that's not too big of a difference. But I think the key in this game is to milk clock, protect the lead, and keep Lamar Jackson and ultimately Derrick Henry off the field.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually a key. And I mean, we could talk about the other 7 games or whatever. I don't even know how many games, but 6 games, 5 other games this weekend. And say that that's a key for X team is to hold the ball. I think it's important here. Again, our defense showed life. You don't want them getting gassed early. I think that's what happened a couple times in this 4-game skid, and then not against Cincinnati, but the other 3 games. And they teams, when you get gassed, one of the things is it's hard to get off the field on 3rd down, and we've seen that time and time again with his defense. So it's more so not necessarily out of fear of Jackson and Henry as it is just trying to keep your defense fresh. And
right.
Time of possession, winning time of possession doesn't mean you have to run the ball 800 times. You can still, they had time of possession in the first meeting against Cincinnati. They had a big time of possession advantage, and they were throwing the ball all over the place. So, again, you don't have to just 3 yards in a cloud of dust to win that stat. And I do agree with you that stat is important.
Number 2, no turnovers. Force the turnover, don't produce them, right? Protect the football. One glaring stat during this 4-game losing streak has been the Steelers have put the ball on the turf, and they put it on more than once at key times as well when they were driving to potentially tie a game, get momentum back in their favor, take a lead. In these playoff games, man, I go all the way back to those Bill Cowher years. They always talked about the team in these playoffs. You can make this argument for any football game at any level, but in particular, these playoff games, if you lose the turnover battle, you most likely lose the game.
No doubt. It's playoffs, regular season, preseason. If you lose the turnover battle, more times than not, you're gonna lose the game. And a lot of that too comes down to ball luck, right? I mean, I don't know how many times during this 4-game skid, balls on the floor, so to speak, and it seems to bounce right to a member of the opposing team, whether they fumbled it or whether we fumbled it. Not a whole lot of ball luck as far as turnovers in this past month. Beanie Bishop, what a tremendous athletic play on the interception. Maybe that helps turn things around. But I think it's important, especially on the road, even if you don't win the battle of turnovers, you don't lose the battle of turnovers. If each team has no turnovers, if each team has 2 turnovers, I think the Steelers can get by. But if Baltimore has the advantage, it's not going to be pretty.
My last key to the game in order for the Steelers to upset the Ravens in this wild card game this Saturday is to let Russ cook, but maybe use Fields in those short yard situations that we were talking about earlier. The Ravens have the number 1 ranked defense against the run. The Steelers came out last week against the Cincinnati Bengals and tried to establish a running game on the offensive side, tried to limit the passes by Russ Wilson. They blamed the weather. You look back at the first meeting between the Steelers and Bengals. The Steelers threw all over the Bengals. They went reverse order. Didn't work very well for their offense and only produced 17 points and 1 touchdown in that season finale game against the Bengals. This game in Baltimore this week, Dawn, against that number 1 ranked rush defense of the Ravens, I think they got to come out throwing. They got to get Pickens back on the same page with Russell Wilson. And I think this passing game has to have a big night if they are to upset the Ravens.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, they went run heavy against Cincinnati, and we all know how that worked. Baltimore, to their credit, they made some changes after that second victory over Cincinnati, in which they gave up a zillion yards but still won the game. And those changes have helped. They look like the Baltimore defense of norm, which we're kind of used to. As you mentioned, tough to run against. I don't think you come out and throw the ball 50 times. I still think you have to establish some sort of a semblance of a run game, especially the fact if you do come out throwing and Russ is under pressure and Russ is getting sacked, and that's a byproduct of both offensive line failure and Russ holding the ball too long and receivers not getting open. You're going to have to, at some point, I think, have some success in running the ball. I don't think you can lean on it as heavily as they did against the Bengals. But I think what we're going to see here is sort of a throwback to the 2000, and the older you get, the less you can remember these things. It was 2008. Was that a Super Bowl run? 2008
yes, that's
season?
The last Super Bowl win, 16 years ago.
Was that the one, or was it 05? No, it was 05. Okay, now I'm sort of putting this through my head. The 05 season, we went on a Sunday night or a Monday night to Indianapolis during the regular season, and we just got destroyed. First play, Manning goes deep, touchdown.
Yes.
And the Colts just annihilated us. We were run heavy, those teams under Bill Cowher. come out against the Colts and we're throwing the ball.
Heath Miller had a huge game.
Yep. Very first series, Ben finds Miller on a little lob pass, and I think we're going to see something similar to that. I think we're going to see them come out and be much more aggressive, especially on first downs, but still try to get something going on the run game. Loosen them up a little bit and then run the ball.
Don, quickly, let's go through all the games and get your picks, and I'll give mine as well. And then we will finish with Steelers, Ravens, and give our pick before we wrap things up. The other AFC wildcard game, well, of course, there's three in each AFC and NFC, but one of the other ones is what will start off wildcard weekend in the NFL. Saturday at 4:30, Chargers at Texans. The Texans, the champions of the AFC South. This was the game in which a lot of Steeler fans wanted to see the Steelers in Houston rather than go to Baltimore. Who do you like, LA Chargers or Texans?
Yeah, Houston was the sexy pick before the season because of the year they had last year with the rookie coach and the rookie quarterback. And, it has not been as effective. They were good enough to win the South, but that's not necessarily saying much. They ended on a down note. They have as much momentum as the Steelers do, I think, coming into the postseason. Chargers played beyond my expectations this year. I give Coach Harbaugh the lesser a big time pat on the back. I think they've had an outstanding season. I like LA on the road.
I do as well. I'm going to take the Chargers at the Texans. On Sunday, it's Broncos at Bills. The Broncos, another surprise team that gets into the playoffs there. The Bills are the Bills, though, man. They that was a team in which they lost a lot in the offseason, and I don't think a lot of people, including us, thought that they were going to have the type of year that they did. But 13-4, they're the number 2 seed in the AFC. I like the Bills at home to roll over the Broncos.
Yeah, Denver outkicked their country. I don't know that they're going to roll them, but I definitely like Buffalo. Denver, the one thing they have is they have a defense, and defenses travel. So I think the Broncos could keep this close, but I'd be stunned if they pull off the upset.
Packers at Eagles as we move over to the NFC. The Packers 11-6, the Eagles 14-3, champions of the NFC East. I like the Eagles at home against the Packers. How about you?
I'd like the Eagles a lot more if Jalen Hurts everything was good to go. The fact that he's struggling with that concussion is very concerning. It should be if you're an Eagles fan, but I think if he plays, they'll win. If not, that becomes a toss-up.
Commanders at Buccaneers Sunday night at 8:00. Washington, again, another team that kind of came out of nowhere this year. The Buccaneers as well. I don't think a lot of people thought Tampa would be the team in the South, but they are the NFC South champions. They're 10-7. Commanders 12-5.
Yeah, Washington's playing with house money. They have nothing to lose. They weren't supposed to be, have this kind of success with a very young team. They have the young quarterback in Daniels, but they're young in a lot of positions. Great season, but I think midnight strikes. I like Tampa Bay at home.
I am going to go with the Commanders on the road to upset the Buccaneers this weekend. There you go.
Right.
I'm going to keep riding with Washington. Vikings at Rams. Boy, that was a great game between the Lions, who end up being the number 1 seed in the NFC. They have the bye. Of course, the Chiefs have the bye in the AFC. But the Vikings, having lost that game at 14 wins on the season, much like the Eagles with a 14-win season, they have to play a wild card game. They have to go on the road, though, to L.A., to the Rams, who are 10-7. Who do you like, Vikings or Rams?
Well, as a fan of 70s football, this is old school. These two teams used to always play in the 1970s. I'm going to say Vikings, but the question is, has Sam Darnold, as the clock struck midnight on him, he really had a rough game in that massive contest for the NFC North against Detroit. If he plays the way he's played all year, I think Minnesota has too many weapons, especially on defense. But if he struggles, LA, very potent offensively, they could win at home. But I'll go with the Vikings.
I'm going to go with the Vikings as well on the road at the LA Rams. Finally, the game in which we were previewing here on Oneberg this evening, the AFC wildcard game, the Steelers and the Ravens, round 3 in Baltimore. Again, the line as of the time that we were recording this broadcast is 9.5 favored to the Ravens. Don, I'm going to go ahead and give you my pick, and then we'll listen to what you have to say about this game. I think this is going to be a close game. I think if the Steelers can win that time of possession and keep Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry off the field, don't produce turnovers, force turnovers, protect the football, and let Russ cook and have a big day with the passing against the number 1 ranked run defense in the Ravens. I think that's the formula for an upset win at Baltimore. If they can do those 3 things, I think they win a close game, 20-19. Boz kicks a field goal at the end to win the game 20-19. It's going to be much like what we saw with the Bengals Steelers this past week, but this time the black and gold come out on top, 20-19. They shocked the world. How about that?
I bring up 2005. The rematch against the Bengals, the rematch against the Colts, where the script changed. I bring up 1989, when the Steelers somehow, some way, Chuck Noll, his last glorious season, got the Steelers into the postseason. Heavy underdogs against Houston at the Astrodome and Earl Campbell. And somehow, some way, the Steelers got it done and prevailed. I'm going to drink a little Ravens juice.
There you go. What is that juice? What is that? Purple.
It's Ravens juice.
It's purple, whatever it is.
And I am going to say Steelers pull off the upset. Now, I know we sound like a couple of fanboys, but I really think if it's a close game, and these games usually are, the Steelers will find a way to win. Mike Tomlin, for as much criticism as he receives for the way he ties his shoe or whatever, his teams, when they're dogs, when no one expects them to win, is when they play their best. And if they play their best, I think they're going to win a close game. The flip side of this is this game could easily, with the confidence not being there and with all of the self-inflicted wounds that they've had over the last month, this also could be a blowout in favor of Baltimore. So if they can keep it close, the longer the game goes, I like the Steelers' chances.
So that will do it for our AFC wildcard preview, Dawn. And I will end with this. The Steelers, I also have a gut feeling that tells me they're just due, right? They've lost 5 straight playoff games. They've lost 4 straight games towards the end of the season. The defense is healthy. You have an experienced quarterback going into the playoffs with the 2nd most playoff victories as a starting quarterback in Russell Wilson. I don't know. That for me, that all adds up to this is going to be a close game. I don't like this spread of 9.5, and I like the Steelers in an upset as well. But again, win that time of possession, limit your turnovers to hardly no turnovers, force the turnovers, and let Russ have a game on Saturday night. I think that's the formula for an upset victory in Baltimore. Don, thanks for coming on. Enjoyed it as always.
My pleasure, Ed. Thanks for having me.
We will have the Steeler post-game show here on Oneberg this upcoming weekend, either Saturday night after the game or Sunday morning. So make sure you stay logged on here to Oneberg, to our Oneberg Facebook channel, Oneberg YouTube, or listen back on our Spotify channel. It's the Steelers, the 6th seed, 10-7, at the number 3 seed, the Baltimore Ravens, 12-5, the AFC wildcard this Saturday night at 8 o'clock from M&T Bank Stadium. For Don Rebel, Ed Troop signing off for now. We will see you next time right here on Oneberg. Enjoy the NFL playoffs and wildcard weekend, and we'll talk to you soon here on Oneberg.